In 390 BC, Gallic warriors swept through the Italian peninsula and sacked the city of Rome, burning its streets to ash and leaving its people in ruins. At the time, Rome was little more than a collection of scattered hill villages, and by all historical logic, it should have faded into obscurity like countless defeated settlements before it. Instead, over the following centuries, the Romans accomplished one of the most astonishing comebacks in human history. They transformed their destroyed settlement into the ultimate megacity, a colossal metropolis of over 1 million people, featuring marble temples, 10-story residential towers, and mountain-fed aqueducts. At its peak, this single city controlled an empire spanning 3 continents and 70 million people, all governed from one beating heart, the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was a dense plaza packed with monuments, basilicas, and sacred sanctuaries where the fate of the Mediterranean world was decided. At one end stood the Curia, the Senate House, where 600 senators gathered to debate the laws of the empire. Nearby stood the Rostra, a raised speaker's platform where some of Rome's most dramatic political moments unfolded. It was here that Mark Antony delivered his legendary funeral address after the assassination of Julius Caesar, holding up Caesar's blood-stained toga and revealing that the dictator had bequeathed his private gardens and wealth to the public. Antony whipped the crowd into such an emotional frenzy that they cremated Caesar's body right in the middle of the plaza. On that exact spot, the Romans later erected the Temple of Julius Caesar, marking the first time a mortal Roman was officially deified as a god. Just steps away burned the sacred flame in the Temple of Vesta. Tended continuously for over 1,000 years by the Vestal Virgins, this sacred fire was believed to be the literal life force of the state. If the flame ever went out, Romans believed the empire itself would fall. While public business dominated the Forum, the men ruling the empire lived directly above it on Palatine Hill. What began as a relatively modest residence built by Rome's first emperor, Augustus, eventually spiraled into a sprawling complex of unimaginable luxury. Emperor Domitian took imperial grandeur to unprecedented heights by constructing 2 side-by-side palaces. The first, the Domus Flavia, was a massive ceremonial complex featuring throne rooms with 30-meter ceilings where foreign kings were received and state banquets hosted hundreds of guests. Right beside it was his private residence, the Domus Augustana, filled with secluded courtyards, lavish baths, and quiet gardens. Domitian even built his own private 160-meter stadium within the palace grounds, so he could watch gladiators and athletes compete without leaving his home, even though the massive Circus Maximus sat directly down the hill. Down in the valley, the Circus Maximus hosted the true mass entertainment of the ancient world. Seating over 150,000 spectators, it was the largest stadium ever built. Romans gathered here to watch chariot racing, a high-speed, deadly sport where drivers rounded tight hairpin turns at speeds up to 75 kilometers per hour. Drivers tied the reins around their waists to gain leverage, meaning a crash often resulted in being dragged to death beneath heavy wooden wheels. Successful charioteers who survived earned staggering fortunes, with one famous driver earning enough over his career to feed the entire city of Rome for a year. Spectators were fiercely divided into 14 factions, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, and fanaticism ran so deep that political riots frequently erupted in the stands, leaving thousands dead in the violent aftermath. If chariot racing was defined by speed, the Colosseum was built for deliberate, engineered slaughter. Holding 50,000 spectators, the Colosseum hosted gladiator matches, criminal executions, and massive staged animal hunts. Over 3 centuries, an estimated 400,000 people and hundreds of thousands of wild animals, ranging from African lions to German bears, were killed on its floor. What made the spectacle so seamless was the hidden world beneath the arena floor, a two-story underground labyrinth of tunnels, holding cells, and 28 manually operated elevators. Slaves worked in near darkness to lift caged beasts and gladiators through trapdoors, making wild animals appear on the arena floor as if by magic. During the Colosseum's 100-day opening games alone, over 5,000 animals were slaughtered to satisfy the crowd's appetite for blood and spectacle. When Romans were not watching games, their city reflected a deeply religious and sophisticated culture. Among its greatest surviving structures is the Pantheon, built by Emperor Hadrian to honor all the gods at once. The Pantheon remains an engineering wonder, featuring a unreinforced concrete dome spanning 43 meters across, with a central opening, the oculus, letting in sunlight and rain. It remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, preserved almost perfectly because it was converted into a Christian church in 609 AD. Across town, perched on Capitoline Hill, stood the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Built in 509 BC, this massive sanctuary served as the spiritual apex of Rome, where victorious generals ended their triumphal processions with sacrifices after conquering distant lands. Maintaining control over a city of this size required absolute military authority, personified by the Praetorian Guard. Unlike regular legionaries who were forbidden from entering Rome in uniform, the Praetorians were stationed inside the city limits at the Castra Praetoria, a heavily fortified fortress built on the city edge. Serving as the emperor's personal bodyguards, these elite troops wore distinct ceremonial armor with side-to-side helmet crests and carried shields emblazoned with scorpions and stars. Over time, the Praetorian Guard evolved from a protection force into kingmakers, assassinating at least 13 emperors, orchestrating coups, and on one notorious occasion, putting the imperial throne up for auction to the highest bidder. Beyond monuments and military power, Rome's survival as a megacity depended on urban engineering that was centuries ahead of its time. To quench the thirst of 1 million citizens, 11 major aqueducts channeled millions of gallons of fresh mountain water into the city every day. The Aqua Marcia alone stretched 69 kilometers, entering Rome on towering stone arches as tall as a 9-story building, relying entirely on gravity to deliver fresh water to public fountains, private residences, and sprawling bathhouses. The baths of Trajan, covering 11 hectares, served as massive public centers where Romans of all social classes gathered to exercise, bathe in heated pools, conduct business, and socialize. Meanwhile, ordinary Romans lived in insulae, multi-story brick and timber apartment buildings that housed 90% of the population. Rising 5 or 6 stories high, these ancient high-rises were prone to frequent fires and structural collapses, forcing emperors to institute building height limits. At street level, citizens bought food, spices, and imported goods at Trajan's Market, a multi-level complex featuring over 150 shops integrated directly into the hillside, essentially the world's first indoor shopping mall. When you look at modern megacities like New York, London, Tokyo, or Shanghai, the underlying blueprint traces directly back to Rome. High-rise apartment living, massive sports arenas, multi-level commercial hubs, complex public water networks, and poured concrete foundations were all pioneered in the streets of Rome 2,000 years ago. Rome didn't just build an empire, it solved the fundamental puzzle of how 1 million strangers could live, trade, and thrive together in a single city, laying the foundation for the urban world we live in today.